Star Trek will not be presented tonight, so that we may bring you the following special program.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
I remember when The Dark Knight Returns came out. I remember when Watchmen came out. So, of course, I remember when Kingdom Come came out.
Kingdom Come is 4 separate issues, 48 pages apiece. It was an all-immersive kind of lifestyle for me.
It blew people away. I mean, this was the most sought-after book there was.
This was something very new, very different.
No one had seen anything like that at that scale before.
It was amazing.
I never thought from anything that people would still be talking about this book 25 years later.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. I'm happy to welcome Chris Ryall back to Word Balloon. He formerly of IDW, but a great comic book writer as well, and now a great representer of a seminal book from 1974. Chris, showing my age, I remember it well, but that is, of course, here we go. It's the origins of Marvel Comics.
There it is, the book that started it all. Good to see you again, John.
Good to see you, Chris. Absolutely, man. And there's the original cover, and that was Romita that painted
That was
this?
John Romita, yep.
Excellent. And you've again put out the new book that features an homage to that great cover by Alex Ross, Origins of Marvel Comics,
with the clever addition of a couple of added hands that weren't on that first cover. So
let's point that out. Absolutely. Oh wait, there's the Dark Knight.
He's not in this first volume, by the way.
But I do love that. Yes, above, and we've changed from the sleeve shirts in the original cover. Here's the original, everybody, and here's the Ross cover, and get a little different pose from the Thing and the Hulk.
You should know also, like, Ross's process is so precise, the way he works. That watch is something he heavily researched to make sure that was the exact model that Stan was photographed wearing in numerous pictures. So
hilarious.
Yeah.
Of course Alex thought that way. That's fantastic,
yeah.
Man. Chris, I'm in the camp that this is an amazing book. And that's funny. I'm assuming ChemDog is referring to the book as a 70s seminal. Hey, this was an important book. And we'll talk a little bit about the controversy of the way Stan told the origins of Marvel Comics. But doesn't matter. This was a very, very important book 50 years ago.
Yeah, and so the thing that really makes it so important is, I mean, it's hard when you describe it now to people, when you describe the fact that you could walk into a mass market bookstore, you could walk into a library, and at best, you might find a copy of this book, this Jules
greatest
book.
Yes.
But that was really the only book that was in the mass market that collected comic books in any kind of a, presentable edition with the spine, that kind of a thing. And so Marvel just didn't do that. And so in the 70s, like, you maybe had, I'm kind of doing the audiobook version of the Origins book, but you had these, you had these.
Zooming in again, stand by.
Yeah, these cheapy
the paperbacks.
And they were, they definitely weren't the greatest reading experience. And so that was about it for what you'd find in the mass market with Marvel. And so it wasn't until this first book, here's my original copy of Origins of Marvel Comics, that Marvel's books or the stories were actually, compiled into a bookshelf book. And so you could find this book in libraries and bookstores. And so what it did was not only make it more accessible, but it also kind of validated all of us comic nerds, like, in the eyes of our parents. They could walk into a real bookstore now and see this alongside, I don't know, The Joy of Sax or Jonathan Livingston Seagull or whatever book they were there for, and they see this on the same table and go, okay, well, wait a minute. Maybe that stuff my kid's reading doesn't just rot their brain. Like, it's actually a legitimate book now too.
Greatest Christmas ever was getting those books. That, and I maybe I got them in 75 because I also got Son of Origins, I believe, for the same Christmas.
Yeah.
Here's the cover to that.
The sequel. Yeah.
First sequel. And I'm assuming it wasn't released until the following year. Am I wrong?
Yeah,
Okay.
they were reversed. They were released about a year apart. So it was Origins, Son of Origins, and then Bring on the Bad Guys.
Bring on the Bad Guys, and then the women's book, and I forget
the
what.
superhero women, then the Greatest Superhero Battles, and then the Fireside line from there kind of split more into doing individual titles. So you got Spider-Man, Captain America, the Hulk, which is a weird size compared to all the others. It was a larger size book. And it was when they were slapping the TV superstar label on all the Hulk's books at that point. So
Sure.
that was when the Hulk TV show was going on, Spider-Man was going on, and then Doctor Strange was the other volume that got the solo release. And at the time, Doctor Strange was going to be a big part of Marvel's, media empire. They planned the TV movie that didn't really work. He had his own calendar around the same period, and so yeah, Doctor Strange was going to be the next big thing on TV, but it didn't quite have the same lifespan as Spider-Man or the Hulk.
I'm sorry. Again, growing up during that period, everyone, you got to understand. Yeah, those movies, most of them sucked. It's all we had. We had that, and we had those terrible challenges of the superheroes that ended in the roast.
The roast. Oh man, the roast.
But there was Adam West and Burt Ward as Batman again, and Robin. So it's like, okay, great. Just so they, as you said, just so because it was being acknowledged by a big medium like television, and certainly in the case of the Fireside books, like you said, legitimate books. I know my parents bought mine at Crocs and Brentano's, a book chain that no longer exists, sadly. But it was right down the street. The one downtown was right down the street from my dad's restaurant, so it was an easy pickup for him. But I love the essays that you have in the book, and one of them in particular is the woman that kind of created the Fireside line,
Linda Sunshine. Yeah.
Linda Sunshine, is that her last?
Sunshine, yeah.
Okay, there you go. Of the California Sunshines.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I found out about Linda primarily through Rob Sakowitz, who did a piece on her for, I think it was Publishers Weekly. And, he was talking about the person who essentially created or shepherded the whole Fireside line. And so, I knew nothing about Linda because there weren't credits in these books back then. I mean, there was one credit on this book, for the most part. And as you referred to, became a point of controversy in some circles, but yeah, Linda was, a fledgling editor at that point. Like, she was only a couple years working in New York publishing when she started this. And so, at the time before that, she was at Crown Books, where she worked on some of the DC collections, like the Superman, the 30s to the 70s collections. And what those were was black and white reprints. They had just a few color inserts. And the way she explained it on a panel at Comic-Con, we got her to be a special guest at Comic-Con this past summer, and it was her first Comic-Con ever. She got an Inkpot Award. Like, it was pretty great.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad she well deserving of an Inkpot Award. Absolutely, man. Because the Fireside line and those Crown/Bonanza books as well. Yeah. Again, another great Christmas for me when I got Superman and Batman from the 30s to the 70s.
And it was not only, a cool bookstore book, but it was the kind of thing where we could read stories that we otherwise would never have access to. There wasn't a Marvel Unlimited. There weren't reprints of these books. They weren't anywhere. And so you might see the editorial, and I think I refer to that in the text of my introduction. You would see footnotes in the books, Spider-Man, Bit by Spider, and Amazing Fantasy 15. And even then, at that point, the Marvel Universe is a dozen years old. Those reprints were completely out of reach for kids, like we had to barely beg and plead just to get a couple quarters together to buy comics. And so you had no chance of reading those origin issues and the early issues until they were compiled in this book. And so for a lot of us, like, this is the first time you ever saw those like seminal stories. So yeah, again, like, for whatever controversy people want to apply to Stan Lee's essays, like, the books themselves were very important just because they not only showed us these stories, they got this material into bookstores, but it made you care about not only the characters, but the Marvel company and the bullpen and all of that. Like, Stan's essays were so warm and welcoming to kids that you just felt like you were invited in, and you just felt a part of the club in ways that even those great DC collections didn't really do.
In the modern era, everyone talks about community being so important, and especially when you're into something. And yeah, we've got wonderful examples of it now with everything that's happening online. But really, and I love, by the way, it's okay that the dogs are barking. Don't sweat it, Chris.
It's a bug, so it's not anything actually menacing. But I don't know what.
That's all right. That's all right. That's real. That's real. And I always appreciate when a cat walks across the camera line or whatever. It doesn't bother me at all.
I would appreciate it if he stopped too. But
I understand. I understand. But but no. Yeah, these books were, as you say, or I should say, back to Stan's soapbox and the editorials and his whole attitude. And some people will dismiss them. Well, he was a good marketer, and it's like, no, he was the marketer. There were a lot of great comics that were being produced from the Golden Age through the Marvel Age, and they were all faceless, nameless companies that came and went. Stan made everybody face front and stand up and say, no. Marvel is doing it different. You're all invited to join the party. And that was huge. And again, even 12 years later, when these books started to come out in 74 and stuff. Yeah. I mean, I was a DC kid first. And I'm 59. So I was in December of 64. So I was 9 years old when Origins came out.
Yeah.
And I was still discovering a lot of aspects of the Marvel universe as a 9-year-old kid. I knew Spider-Man, and I knew the characters that were in the Marvel superheroes cartoons because they were being rerun on weekdays. So I knew who Thor was, and things like that. The Treasury edition of the Fantastic Four that had the Galactus saga.
Yeah.
There you go. Exactly.
On one of those shelves. Yeah.
I have no doubt. But yeah, that was my first exposure to the Fantastic Four or the Treasury-sized Avengers comic. When I first saw Black Panther, I'm like, is that Batman? Well, wait a minute, he's black. Why is he black? Because his cowl looked like Batman's cowl. Things like that. But yeah, man, no, it opened up a whole new world to me. And then this reinforced it, and I got a version of the Origins. And we can talk about the rib job for a second because truly that new book, man, that guy, I'm really sorry that, it really seems like it personally hurt the author of the fabrications that Lee made. Lee was like Walt Disney. I compare him to Walt Disney that claimed a lot of credit for a lot of what the 9 Old Men animators were able to make as far as Disney's Zenith and stuff. And, they were signed Walt Disney.
Matt Groening signing all the Futurama and Simpsons comics. And, Bob Kane's a whole other thing.
Oh, sure.
But
sure.
And Stan wasn't doing that. But the funny thing is, like, we all sort of ascribe, like, the way we view the world as the way they viewed the world, 50 years ago. And credit wasn't as big of a thing. I mean, I know it's still graded on some of the creators that they didn't get equal billing alongside Stan when he talked about it. But Stan also Stan was there hyping the company and himself as the sort of the face of the company. But I don't know. It was funny. Like when we announced that we were going to be doing this, when Simon Schuster announced they were doing a 50th anniversary edition of this book, there was a lot of commentary like, well, hopefully the new edition, does a proper accounting of what Stan did and didn't do. And, and I was trying to explain to people and they were asking me about it. Like, I don't have interest in doing that kind of a book. First of all, because none of us were there. None of us could, parse exactly who did what. And I don't have interest in picking sides in that way because I think all those guys made each other better. And so what I wanted these books to be was a celebration of like the creative process, the collaborative process, the whole making of comics with teams, writers and artists, and how they all kind of work together to create this foundational universe that, everybody's still so enamored with a half century later. And so that's all I wanted the books to be. And I thought, so the way Alex Ross wanted to approach doing this cover by sort of the subtle, let me see where to hold it, where I can show
Hold on. Yeah, I'll even bring up, because I got it here as well. There we go.
But yeah, it's subtle but pointed edition of the hand. So you have the Kirby hand drawing Thor, and you have the Ditko hand finishing Doctor Strange. And that, I think, was the right way to go about this book, which is acknowledging, showcasing, heralding the people that worked on these stories alongside Stan, but not coming down in some kind of a screed, because this is a celebratory book. It's celebrating Marvel's origins and Marvel's history and sort of the origins of these stories from the creators, from all the creators, you know what I mean? So I don't have interest in doing that kind of book, and nor do I think that kind of book really is ever accurate, because it always is filtered through a very specific point of view. That's always usually a very pointed point of view that is already firmly in place before they even start doing the research. And so, again, this book is celebrating Stan, Jack, Steve, and everybody that worked on these characters.
Well, and to your credit, you have at the back of the book, biographies, little thumbnail biographies of all the contributors to the art that is represented in the book. So, I think you do your job in terms of pointing out these collaborators, how important they are. And then also, you got the Linda Sunshine interview. You have a good essay in there. Tom Brevoort has a good essay in there. Alex Ross has a good essay and a whole creative process.
Alex Ross is kind of certainly from the cover on in, but he's sort of the superstar of this book, in that not only did he create this great cover for the deluxe edition, but he then did a piece that discussed the creative process as somebody, who has created on his own and alongside a lot of other writers. And he's a Kirby guy, and he never would have agreed to do this book if the book wasn't going to offer a fair accounting of all of these creators' work, And then he also gave us all of his process images to show how he put the cover together, the action figures, the photography to get the lighting right, like just everything that goes into putting a book like this together. And so, I'm so happy that he was, not only willing to do the cover, but willing to contribute all these other pieces to it too. And then one of the cappers for me is Larry Lieber doing the essay, because Larry Lieber is probably, I think, the only living creator that worked on one of the stories in this book. He was there on the origin, the introduction of Thor, and then in Son of Origin, it's the introduction of Iron Man. And he wrote a really sweet essay about his brother Stan and just working with him, and just, it was just kind of like his way to say goodbye to Stan in a way that he didn't really do publicly before. And so I just thought it was just, I thought I gave him the direction of talking about the working with Stan and Jack on creation of Thor, and it turned into just a very sweet sort of elegy for his brother. And I found that even more just touching, and something I was real happy to include. So
I agree. Also, from the period of 74, this great review from Ray Bradbury. And I don't know about
weird? It's so weird.
No, well, actually, again, knowing his background, and then also I'm pleased to say that before he passed away in 2006, I met him and Ray Harryhausen, and they were just wandering San Diego Comic-Con, because it was before things got nuts, and they had been doing it for decades. So for them, it's just, hey, it's, the San Diego convention that we used to do at the El Capitan, and we're just going to walk around. Could not have been more approachable.
Yeah.
I mean, to meet those two Rays was just such a thrill.
Oh my God.
But, the guy, but again, the guy he grew up along with comics. He was writing in the 50s and stuff, and he loved comics, and you could tell from that review.
Yeah. And so what John's talking about is there's we reprinted a review that Ray Bradbury did in the LA Times, where he reviewed the Origins of Marvel Comics book, and he probably spent more than half the review just sort of talking about pop culture and high art and low art, and that comic books were kind of trashy, and just, it's very funny. Like, it takes him a while to even get into talking about the meat of the book itself, but it's also very Bradbury in that it kind of meanders in a very charming way. I love that. I love that, like, unearthing that kind of stuff, or even some of the initial sketches that, like, Marie Severin did, the cover sketches that didn't quite pass muster, just stuff like that, all the sort of handmade bits that came together in the making of this book, I found really just charming and fun to, include in the book.
Happy to see that from Dynamite Comics, Nick Barucci is watching.
Oh, look at Nick. Hey, Nick.
There you go. You wanted to drop in and say hi to us. And also, if you're watching the show, exactly, Nick, please hit that thumbs up. Please hit the subscribe bell, and do what you can to.
Oh man, Barucci's our hype man. I like it.
Nick always pimps for me, and I appreciate that.
Great.
That's very kind. Very kind. So, Nick, you got to do that. You got to come on Word Balloon. We got to do that interview that we've been talking about for years. Let's go. See Chris nodding. Chris has been there before.
Absolutely.
So,
never reborn interview. Yeah.
Thanks, man. No. I'm so glad you did this. I'm so glad this is out. Is the plan would you do it for the other Fireside books, or at the very least, Son of Origins?
I absolutely wish I could make an announcement here. But my going into this, I really wanted to bring all of these books back into print. And so, Simon and Schuster willing, absolutely. Like these are the kind of books that like, I don't know if they were ever going to come to pass, like bringing the book back into print. Cause I tried years ago and just couldn't make it happen. So they've been out of print since the reissues that Marvel did in 97. They've been out of print for at least a couple of decades. And so I started this file when I was at IDW, all these books that I wanted to make happen. And so I've been compiling images, old ads, things like the slipcases that the original books were released in, the concept art, whatever I could find, just in hopes of eventually someday making a book. And so I will say I've got a fair amount of material for Sun and Bad Guys, if those can happen. I'd also love to bring the Silver Surfer book. That was sort of the last time that Stan and Jack ever worked together. Their 78 graphic novel. I'd love to bring that back into print. So
sure.
I mean, hell, we should do the fitness book, right? And the cookbook and all of it.
And how to draw the Marvel way. I don't know what status that is. Hey, Pete Beiser, regular Word Balloon viewer and listener. Met Larry Lieber at New York Comic Con a few years ago. Don't see him out there much. Sad to know how distant he was from Stan and that he doesn't get much attention for his contributions in those early days.
Yeah, it's sort of in reverse order. That's what I wanted to do with this book, is make sure that Larry got his due also. Because again, it wasn't about Stan. It wasn't even just about Stan, Jack, and Steve, but it's about all of these creators, even the sort of the next wave that worked on these characters, like Marie, like
Don Heck,
Romita,
Heck,
all these guys. But certainly Larry, because Larry was there at ground zero for Thor and for Iron Man. Like, as he points out in his essay, he named the metal that Thor's hammer is made of. He named Tony Stark as he and so he contributed these things, at right there. And again, like the only living person that worked on these stories. So it was amazing to not only get to talk to him, but I'm actually meeting up with him next week ahead of the New York Comic Con. So, there will be a photo op with the book, and I've never met him in person. And
wonderful.
So, again, yeah, I mean, like, you hear the stories about the relationship he had with his brother, but again, I only base anything on what people, tell me directly. And so the essay he wrote and the things he said, spoke of a very different relationship than has kind of been reported in a lot of places. And so I got to take the word of the person that's telling it to me, because he was there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, plus, there was at least 10 years of age difference, at least. And that's one of the
I've got a brother, like I've got siblings, like it's always complicated. So it's nothing you're going to be able to portray in the press or.
Yeah. Well, and again, like Stan was like starting a life out as a young man when Larry was still like in grade school and everything. So, again, I know they, likely in different houses and stuff at the time, so yeah, I think you're right. And again, the complications between siblings, I can give you 2 hours on that. Where's my psychiatrist couch, doctor?
Yeah. Well, and again, the essay is very sweet. He talked about how much he misses his brother and everything. And so, yeah, it was great. It was great talking to him. While we're talking about the book real quick, if I can also just show off bits of the design. Like, the book is so beautifully designed by a designer named Ian Chalgren, who's done some other books for me through my Syzygy imprint, but he just got advances of a Spider-Man book he did for Dark Horse. So we did a lot of new and different design work on this edition, just to make it sort of stand out beyond the replica edition. Because there is a replica edition too, for people that don't want the $50 hardcover with the dust jacket. There is a straight softcover reprint that just gets the original material back into print as well. And so both those versions exist side by side now.
Outstanding. No, it's great, man. And truly, I think your essays and the back matter that is in this book only flesh out the story behind the volume. And there you go. Steve Conley, he says, those end pages look great. I can attest to that.
Oh,
absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, Ian is a great designer. He did really nice work on this book. So I couldn't be happier, because again, like I said, this is not only a thing that I've wanted to do for years, but when you can do something, when you can touch a book that you loved as a kid, like I somehow have my name on the cover of a book that Stan Lee worked on. Like, we both. I mean, it's
author flap there. There you go. About the authors, about the editors, indeed.
Yeah, it's like, this is a book that made me love comics and love Marvel and love these characters. And so, I know that these stories are available in 50 different ways now, but just seeing them all together, when you can see, the very first appearance of Fantastic Four, and then the second story included in the book jumps ahead 4 years. So you see the progression that Stan and Jack, and then at that point, Joe Sinnott made on the inks at issue 55, reprinted the book. So you get the earliest story, and then what was at the time a more modern story side by side. You can see the evolution of the characters and the creative teams as you go along. So it's still a unique thrill, I think.
I completely agree. And again, that's why we read the first stories, and then we did read. They were smart enough to include modern stories as well, or close to it.
Yeah.
And man, no, it excited me. I mean, I love, and both volumes, Origins and Son of Origins, first exposure to Nick Fury, first exposure to Daredevil. Both
Who knew the Watcher had an origin? Like I'd never even thought of that. He should have an origin, and then you read that in the second volume, you're like, oh, that's pretty exciting.
And Iron Man, going from that first book, Don Heck, I want to say, was the artist on that, and then to go to, was it Tuska with the Whiplash story?
Colin drew that story.
Oh, it was Gene. Of course it was Gene. Shame on me, because I know he did the Daredevil modern story as well.
Right, yeah.
And I had the pleasure of interviewing Gene very early on Word Balloon and stuff. And it's it's interesting, although, again, sorry, it was in the shitty book, that he told the story of this great Captain America thing that he drew, where it was a car chase with him and the Red Skull. And his inspiration for the car chase was Bullet. And when he first turned it in, it was page after page after page. And Stan's like, too many pages on this car chase. What the hell are you doing? So he got him down to like 3 pages in the final version of it and stuff. But yeah, Gene told me the same story in my interview with him and stuff. So yeah, I love that. And again, I'm sorry, I disagree with this guy who wrote the Rip Job. And it got to the point, forgive me for dwelling so much on it, Chris, but like, well, Stan Lee didn't come up with Excelsior. And it's like, nobody thought he did, dumbass. Jesus. I'm sorry, but I don't know how old the guy is, but he seems to be the product of an uninformed era. And also he repeats various quotes that he found in his research. I credit him for the research, but it's like, I didn't need to hear Stan Goldberg's same story 3 different times in the book and other things like that.
People form these intractable opinions. And so it's really not even worth engaging, especially like when I've sometimes engaged online in ways that I know I shouldn't, trying to defend a point here or there. But, somebody wants to say that John Lennon was the only talented person in the Beatles, and the other wants to say that Paul McCartney is the only one. I'm like, no, Lennon and McCartney, like Lee and Kirby and Ditko. And I don't know why, for all of us who weren't there, everybody's so vested in sort of having an opinion that doesn't necessarily jibe with the reality or the different forms of reality that are out there. I don't know. And, yes, Stan could have been more gracious in the way he talked about some other creators, but also at times when you're talking about things with a reporter, you say a thing, or I created this, instead of saying I created this alongside Bob, because again, credit wasn't as big a thing. And I'm not being an apologist or a defender, because yes, I agree. Like we all agree. There were times when the creator should have gotten more of an equal share, or even an unequal share, weighted more for the artist based on the work that they did. But I don't know. None of us were there to know for sure, or the context of a thing. And again, like together they made each other better. And so that's sort of where I come down. That's really the only reasonable place to come down, I think. But
I agree, Chris. Other than, I really think things started in the 90s with videotape and of news bites, where, as I always say crassly, every fart from the 90s to modern day is on tape somewhere. And that's why politicians, I don't remember saying that. Really? Well, here's a clip, Senator. I don't know to break it to you, but you did say it. So that's great. But there are murky things that, because we weren't there, we don't know. And especially in the comic book history, I always point to the creation of Barry Allen, Silver Age Flash. You got John Broome, you got Carmine Infantino, you got Julie Schwartz. I don't know who else was involved, but again, we never really got the full story of who created what, but all of their hands were involved in Showcase 4, that first issue with Barry Allen's Flash. We don't know. I'm sorry, everybody's dead, and again, poor Larry's, like you said, last man standing. And I'm glad that Larry's out there. For New York, are you doing a panel? And is Larry? You said you're going to see him before New York, but are you?
Larry's not gonna. Larry doesn't want to brave Javits Center, which I completely understand and feel the same way. But so we're gonna meet elsewhere. But I am gonna do a signing for the book at the Simon & Schuster booth.
Cool.
On Friday afternoon. So that'll be fun too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent, man. Again, I'm thrilled this thing is out there. I folks, again, that Jules Pfeiffer book was out there. And then I remember at my library, the Peanuts, they had a great coffee table book of Peanuts imprints. And of course, again, Chris and I are close enough in the same age, we also had those paperbacks of comic strips. So you'd get Peanuts and Beetle Bailey and Hagar the Horrible and all those. And they were fun. But yeah, I mean, like, I know both the Pfeiffer book and the Peanuts book constantly out at the library. I would go to Crocs and Brentano's and just like thumb through the book because it was down the street from my dad's restaurant of the Pfeiffer book and everything. So yeah, when these books came out, it was like, oh my God, finally. I mean, here's some, and like you said too, like even at DC, we had the 80-page Giants and the 100-page Spectaculars, but even that only gave us a fraction of what we got in the 30s to the 70s books for DC. And yeah, Marvel was so new that even in those early days when they would do annuals and things like that, they were reprinting books that were only like 4 or 5 years old. Yeah, when they were putting them in their annuals and things.
Yeah, you could find some of these stories in the sporadic reprints or like Marvel's Greatest Comics and Marvel Tales. Right. But again, like it was more of just the sort of legitimacy that the bookstore edition gave all of our parents. So then, they didn't roll their eyes as much about us collecting these things or reading these things or hiding them inside our school books or whatever the case was, because now these books were at our school library, and so it all just made everything feel more, like real literature, like they should be treated and like they are treated now, but they certainly weren't then.
I completely agree. By the way, I want to acknowledge Steve Conley, who commented earlier, of course, fantastic comic creator in his own right. Absolutely. And another man that's going to be likely at New York, Brooklyn's own Dean Haspiel.
Hey, Dean Haspiel.
There you go. Origins, son of Origins. Oops, hold on. Let me put that back up. Bring on the bad guys. And Superhero Woman was my Bible for so many years. Looking forward to this new edition. Yeah, man, again, Dino's around our ages and stuff. And it's like, again, these were exciting. And I can only imagine from an art standpoint, if Steve and Dino want to comment, even as an artist, what it was like reading these books and stuff. And I know from Alex's standpoint, based on his essay, and also I had a really deep dive conversation with Alex when Full Circle, the Fantastic Four graphic novel that he made. Absolutely, man. Yeah. And yeah, it's always great to talk to Alex about something he loves. And yeah, massive FF fan, massive Kirby guy. It's pretty amazing and very reflective in his work. And,
And I mean, the great thing for all of us that read this book was, like, nowadays there, as you can see, there's an embarrassment of riches of collected editions of comic material. Like, there's no way to even read all of the books once, let alone repeated times. But for us, like, because there weren't that many books, like Dean says, these were our Bibles. Like, you read this over and over and over again. To the point where like the dialogue felt like song lyrics, like you knew it that well. And so it was great. It was almost kind of nice that there wasn't that many other options, because then you could just really absorb this stuff through every bit of our being. You know what I mean? And so now, decades later, like it's still just a huge part of us.
Well, and my original copies are beaten to hell because of constant abuse for 50 years.
Well, that's really that's the true reason I want to make a new edition of this book, because my old edition is fairly held together, and so I needed the comp to actually have a version that I can read and not worry about it falling apart.
I hear you, man. God, I'm an old time radio freak, and there's a fantastic old time radio encyclopedia called Tune In Yesterday, and my book was falling apart so bad. And luckily no illustrations or anything, but just for my own purposes, I had to duct tape the book back together again in certain sections to keep it intact.
Which is how a book should be. Like, a book should be read until it dissolves, like keeping all the books pristine doesn't do anybody any good. Like, crack those spines, bend those pages, like read those books.
And also, like, books like this led me to anthologies of prose. And I remember reading, and in fact, I rebought it because I found it on Amazon at a used bookshop. There was an anthology called The Great American Detective, and it had short stories from Chandler and Hammett, but also so many other of their contemporaries that wrote great detective stories. And it really was this wonderful education. I know that my first anthology like that was Origins of Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
So it led me to more anthologies and more reading. And I think, and also, I always say my father was so, for a guy that only had a 9th grade education, he got it. And my mom passed away early, but Sesame Street was brand new in '69 when I was 4 years old. And my mom, I think, as a message to my father, was get him reading as early as possible. And he did. And he always knew, because he grew up on comics of the 40s and late 30s. So he knew, okay, great. Well, as long as he's reading, I don't care what he reads. I just want him to read. Right. And it did. It opened my mind to real books, prose books. And
look at us today. Yeah.
Exactly, man. We are the nerds. We are the men dwelling in our basements that get not enough sunshine. So, and I want to mention Linda Sunshine because much like Janette Khan, it's really cool that she started with the Bonanza books that came from Crown, and I'm going to throw up the covers again. Superman and Batman from the 30s to the 70s, and the Wonder Woman edition, and a Shazam edition as well that they did, which I got. I didn't get Wonder Woman. Girls! I don't want to read about girls.
Well, it's funny because Wonder Woman's not quite the same. Like the size is a little bit different. That was the Gloria Steinem book.
Yes.
And it didn't quite have the same, it wasn't treated with the same importance or reverence as the other three were for some. Well, I guess we know why back in that era, but
well, yeah, I was going to say, it's hilarious, man. My first New York, 2006 or 7, Gloria had this comic that she made with some advocacy group, and she was set up next to Neil Adams. Oh, and it was, and he's like, "You're going to talk to Ms. Steinem, aren't you?" And I said, I wasn't. He's like, "John, she is like a real superhero. You need to talk to her." Yeah. And at the very least, he goes, "Yeah, she'll talk about anything." He goes, "Believe me, I talked to her earlier." And he goes, "She was great." I'm like, "All right." So I went up, and she was wonderful. And again, my own ignorance and stuff. And I'm like, look, I understood where you were coming from and everything. Because if people don't know, she wrote this fantastic essay in Ms. Magazine about, oh my God, look what they've done to Wonder Woman. They depowered her. This was when Denny was writing the book. They depowered Wonder Woman, and she became a street level martial arts crime fighter, kind of a female Daredevil.
The pantsuit era.
Yeah, and really, I think inspired by Diana Rigg in the TV show The Avengers and Emma Peel. So it's like, and I'm like, well, I understand what you're saying, and she depowered him, or he depowered her, but don't you see, really, like, he was trying to say that she was more like a regular woman and that she was still a superhero despite not having her powers? And she went, no. And I'm like, all right, I respect that. Okay, I'm not going to.
Well, I was glad you mentioned Janette Khan too, because thinking about Linda Sunshine, like the unheralded people or the people that made these massive, like just these enormous contributions to comics and don't get anywhere near the credit they deserve. And Janette is certainly atop that list. Talking to Linda about all of this, it's funny because, Linda's had a 40, 50-year career in publishing. She's done a lot of art books. She's done books about food. She's written sort of like Nora Ephron style books about her family. Like she's done an awful lot of things. And so when you talk to her about her comic book collection part of her career, it was only 2, 3, 4 years of her life, in a 4+ decade career. And so to her, she goes, I don't really see what the big deal is. And so then you explain to her, she's like, oh, well, yeah, I guess that really does,
Well, that's great.
Make a difference for all of you. But she's like, that was just a thing that I did because I thought, well, there's some DC material out there, but there's not Marvel. Maybe there should be Marvel books too. And so her and then Stan Lee got talking and it just became this whole thing, but it certainly wasn't her intent to create an entire sort of, I don't know, section of the market that didn't exist. It was just like, what would be a cool book to get me through the publishing schedule for this year?
Well, another reason why I make the Janette Khan comparison is much like prior to Khan being the publisher at DC, she worked for Scholastic Books. You likely know this. And I read Dynamite, that was the magazine that Janette created. Yeah. And it always had a comic book section in it. And she would they would have panels from the original comics, but it would be an origin of whatever superhero they were highlighting then. And it was great. And that's literally, it was dynamite. And the way that it connected to kids that made DC stand up and go, hey, let's hire her. Yeah, I know she's only 27 or 28 years old, but she's going to be our publisher. I mean, and truly, it's great. She was at the Chicago Humanities Festival late last year and did this fantastic onstage interview and stuff. And it's great. And you can find it, everybody, on YouTube if you look for it. She's one of my great white whales, you'll forgive the comparison, of people that I want to interview before it's too late. And yeah, I get the story straight from her.
She's great. Yeah.
Have you met her?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Over Zoom once, but yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah,
it's funny, we'll have to do a whole separate episode about Dynamite and then Pizzazz magazine and all of those things that also kept us reading.
Absolutely, man. Yes, Pizzazz is right after Dynamite. Indeed, that's fantastic. No, man, exactly.
All these different formats that found ways to put comics in front of kids that we weren't, expecting.
No, but thank God they were there, and like you said, it only legitimized our love in our parents' eyes. So everybody should go out. Get the new Origins of Marvel Comics from Stan. If you want, you can get the version that is just the original version, but I would recommend the deluxe version with all the back matter and other things that Chris and company added, because it's a very satisfying read.
Yeah, thank you. And then anybody who's coming to the New York Comic Con that wants to pick up a copy, either one of those copies, the Simon Schuster booth, 4:00 on Friday, I'll be there signing books. So. And I think one of the entire walls of the Simon booth is going to be the Alex Ross cover art. So that alone will be worth coming by and taking a photo.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's amazing, man. I wanted to talk about other aspects of your career. You long tenure at IDW, of course. Both editing.
That happened. That happened until it didn't. But yeah, it was a good run until it wasn't.
I had a similar radio career. So don't sweat it, Chris. It's all right. But I do want to point out, especially Zombies versus Robots.
God, and that's almost 20 years old now, which is so weird to me that this goofy little thing is now almost 2 full decades old. So maybe at some point there'll have to be a 50th anniversary edition of that silly little title.
Yes, please. Well, and again, I mean, listen, they were great stories, but Ashley Wood, and my God, that art, this was the kind of art I was seeing in the late 90s and early 2000s where I'm like, wow. I mean, every now and then you'd get a Dave McKean in Arkham Asylum, for example.
Ken Williams doing Blood or the other things that he did. Like, yeah. I mean, Bill Sienkiewicz, like,
of course,
all those guys just sort of extending what we all thought comic art could be.
Absolutely. So, like, how did you guys get together on this thing?
So when I started in IDW in 2004, and he was... I don't think it was then. It was like a year later. He was working out of the San Diego office, tiny little office. Like I was employee number 7. So there was, just a few of us packed in this tiny little business park. But Ash at that point had moved from Australia to San Diego, was working in the office once in a while. And he goes, hey, why don't you write me a comic? I'm like, all right, what do you like to draw? He goes, zombies. I'm like, okay. Anything else? He goes, robots. So then we're like, what's the dumbest possible story that could bring these two different things into one story? And we were trying to make a story, because at that point it was kind of the early days of Hollywood options being thrown around for all these books, and we're like, let's just do a comic that can only ever be a comic. Like, there's no character growth, there's no character arc, there's no nothing. Like, zombies are automatons, robots are programmed automatons, and so there's no, like I said, there's no growth, there's no nothing. There's nothing that you can make a film out of. And so it tickled us greatly a few years later when that actually was optioned for film. But that was kind of where it started, was like, what's the silliest thing that we can do to put zombies and robots into a story? Like, zombies need to eat, human brains or what have you to survive. We're going to create a world where there's only robots with just one infant human as the only surviving human on the planet, and then sort of take it from there. And so it was always just a matter of just trying to one up the previous issue, one up each other with this ideas and stuff like that. So it was really as simple as that, just trying to come up with a silly thing that hadn't really been done.
That's great, man. No, and I think the first stuff of Ashley's that I saw was when he was drawing the Metal Gear Solid comics for you guys back then and everything.
Yeah, I think I probably saw stuff a little sooner. He was doing, I think it was Hellspawn.
Yes, yes, with Bendis, I want to say.
Yeah, with Bendis.
Yeah.
And
And,
then-
Automatic Kafka, too, with Joe Casey.
Yeah, and he did an X-Men annual, like one that was, like the Sideways comic, like that old John Byrne Fantastic Four. He did an X-Men annual with Joe Casey. I think it was Casey. So yeah, I would see his art here and there, but I didn't really know his stuff too well. And so just, anytime I put anything on paper for him to draw and he sends back these pages, like, oh my God, like just makes everything better.
Were you the horse whisperer to John Byrne in terms of his association with IDW? Did you work directly with John?
Yep.
All right. In general, how did that relationship with John and IDW happen?
I mean, a lot of working with those kind of guys came about because they were people that I loved as a kid. And so I always felt two responsibilities working in comics. One was to either bring in new people, kind of try to cultivate that next generation of creator, but also to give back to the people that made me happy as a kid. And so John at that point wasn't overemployed. I think he was sort of coming off a challenging run on some books at DC. And so I just reached out to him knowing he was a fan of Angel. We were doing the Angel comic at the time.
Yes.
And, he was very vocal about liking Buffy and Angel. So I asked him if he'd do a cover. And he goes, no, I don't do likeness. I haven't done likeness or license work since Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch at Charlton. I don't have any interest.
I remember that cartoon.
And so then I tried him again. And I go, come on, man, it's just a cover. He goes, I do terrible likeness. I'm like, well, do them as vampires. You don't have to worry about making them just look like, the average dude. And
David
so
Moran,
he did a cover. And he goes, well, what else you got? And I'm like, well, we got Star Trek. And he's a massive Star Trek fan, like from childhood. And so he, again, didn't want to do likenesses. And so he did a Romulans comic. And then he did a comic where he edged a little bit closer. And he did a book with Bones. And then suddenly he's doing Star Trek comics. And so we just took it from there. Like we got along great. I mean, I was never the type of editor who wanted to be heavy-handed just to prove that I could or to like enforce my will or any of that nonsense. Like I tried to hire the right people and then give notes when it was necessary, but not just for the sake of it. And, I think he responded well to that. In fact, he gave me I never met the person he compared me to, but it was, I think, probably the best compliment he could have possibly given in that he said I was the closest he'd ever worked with to Archie Goodwin.
Wow.
And I mean, nobody ever had an arch word, no pun intended, about Archie. I mean, Archie was a great editor, great writer, like just great at building relationships, all those things. And so if I at all emulated any part of that working experience with John, like I feel like I did the right thing. So yeah.
Mission accomplished. Absolutely. I gotta spend a minute on the Star Trek books, not only that John did, but also your own crossover that you did. I'll get to that in a second. But first of all, Leonard McCoy, Frontier Doctor, was such a great idea, explaining what happened to Bones after the original 5-year mission. Before what was he doing that he had the beard and the giant disco medallion and his bare chest? And it's like, yeah, where was Bones? I've been saying for years, especially after Carl Urban did such a great job imitating DeForest Kelley. It's like Paramount. We need Leonard McCoy, Frontier Doctor with Carl Urban. That would be amazing. That would be amazing. But I also really appreciated those Fumetti comics. And if people don't know the term, obviously Chris does, where they were new Star Trek stories that took images from the original series, and John reassembled those images and wrote new stories. We got a sequel to Where No Man Has Gone Before, and what happened to Gary, Kirk's friend, that becomes that omnipotent, almost Q-like, godlike character and stuff. And we had a great Chekhov story in there, I remember. Those were fantastic.
Just out of reach, I have the old Star Trek photo novels, which is actually the first way I ever experienced Star Trek. Before I ever saw the TV show, I got some of these photo novels, and they were like all those things. They were hack jobs of just cutting pictures and slapping word balloons on them, but they were so charming.
Yes.
And so that was kind of the starting place. But at this point, John was not only getting very proficient with Photoshop, but also he had this like weird encyclopedic memory of every episode. And so when he needed, I don't know, a character or even an angle or a position on the Enterprise, he'd go to these episodes and pull the figures into a panel. He would build backgrounds on his computer. Like he was he started getting real into set building and everything like that. And so
Hilarious.
it became as close as you're ever going to get to new episodes set in that world. And the other great thing about those was we got a word that William Shatner loved those books. And I think it's probably because that's the first time ever that William Shatner approved of his likeness in comics.
Yeah.
but so what that did is then Shatner said, well, let's do some conventions together. So the three of us did a few different conventions together, and we got to, like, John got to live out his childhood dream of, spending time with Shatner. And it was kind of charming because at that point, like, John Byrne had done everything he'd done in comics to that point. And he was such a kid around Shatner, like asking him all these really like SNL level questions, about this episode and that episode. And Shatner going, John, I don't know. Why are you living in, so it was very amusing just watching the two of them. Because Byrne was just like this reverential fanboy around him. And it was fun. It was fun to do all that.
I don't know what IDW is doing with the old issues, if they are planning on any sort of John Byrne Trek reproductions or whatever, but absolutely everybody, you should scour eBay for Leonard McCoy Frontier Doctor, the various Alien one-shots that IDW made during then, a fantastic Gary 7 Assignment Earth miniseries that John did as well. But your own crossover, man, you did a great story, and I'll let you explain because it involves several IDW franchises, or well, I should say that they were the licensees of established franchises, and you wrote a cool crossover miniseries.
Yeah, it's funny. I would go on these like epic quests to try to do things with licensed comics that were never able to be done before. And so I wanted to do this big crossover that involved Star Trek, G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Ghostbusters. And all the licensors said no. They're like, it's ridiculous. There's no reason that the Ghostbusters characters and the Transformers and Star Trek would ever have any cause to be in the same universe. And so it took like a year of just trying to build out how this thing could work. And it got to the point where they said yes, even though the characters could still never meet. They kind of all had to meet in the middle, and which was actually using Zombies versus Robots. We had this sort of the usual like interdimensional gateway kind of thing, which was our easy mechanism to drop this character into this universe and that one into this universe, and then sort of send zombies out into all these different universes. And so they were tangentially connected, but not, you never got like Spengler and Spock and Optimus Prime hanging out together, to the chagrin of many people, I will say. But it went fine, and all the licensors go, wait, you didn't break our characters after all. So next time you do it, if you want to do a second one, let's get those characters together. And it kind of then just led all these subsequent crossovers were that much more easily done. Then we ended up getting a Star Trek Planet of the Apes crossover.
Loved that.
Yeah, that was great. The Tipton brothers who wrote that, David and Scott, found this like one sliver where the stories could actually interact and make sense in the timelines. Because, with all these things, you don't want to just like ham-fisted shove the characters together. You want it to at least make sense in people's minds, or at least in the different continuities. There's always a contrivance in making that happen, but you want it to feel as organic as possible anyway.
David and Scott are fantastic Trek writers. Yeah. I have told J.K. Woodward many, many times how much I appreciated his covers, and I think of those Planet of the Apes Star Trek crossovers where Spock and Nova, or Kirk and Nova are in one of the slave wagons and stuff. And oh god, yeah. And really I've loved the times that JK did the interiors, because
and so that leads me then to the Harlan Ellison, The City on the Edge of Forever adaptation, which was like, if I was citing, sort of all of these things we talked about are highlights of things I did at IDW, but that one, that's one where Harlan Ellison and CBS Paramount had this like contentious 50-year fight with one another, because Harlan always hated the way his original script got sort of, in his eyes, watered down and cut apart and sort of truncated to make the City on the Edge of Forever episode. But then when you read his original script, you're like, I don't know, man, there's drug use. There's stuff that like you knew that in 66 standards and practices wasn't going to allow.
Wouldn't fly. Absolutely.
But I understand why Paramount made the changes they made, but at the same time, like, they hated each other. Like when I first got Star Trek, I asked Paramount, just knowing about that Harlan's episode was so beloved, if Harlan could ever get involved in anything. And their response was almost as colorful as Harlan's response when I asked if he'd ever revisit Star Trek. But then after a few years of, getting to know both and working with both and building trust with both, I kind of got them all to come together and do the actual adaptation of his original script. And, like Harlan wasn't a guy who was like, privately, he was very emotional and sweet and lovely. But, in a public setting, he sort of put up the Harlan facade. But still, it was a public setting when JK showed him the first pages of that book, and he started crying just because he was so touched to see, his episode finally like brought to visual life the way he wanted. And so I don't know, that book was just such a perfect sort of distillation of all those different parts of Star Trek and Harlan and JK and the Tiptons, and all of it together just was such a satisfying experience.
Like I said, I've said it in the past, I should say, that IDW has been a very good licensee of the Star Trek brand. And even at times when I felt the movies and television shows of recent vintage fell short, I've never felt that way about the comics. When Mike Johnson was writing the Kelvin Universe comics, he really managed to thread the needle and tell original series stories. But because it was a different universe and the changes in that universe, we got a new story. And man, lately, all the guys and women that have been writing and drawing Star Trek, Lansing and Kelly on the main book, and Chris Cantwell on the Defiant book currently. Unbelievable stuff.
Well, and of course, I couldn't give a shit about any of that because
I understand.
No, I'm totally kidding. I actually want to praise Heather Antos because Heather has done such a nice job, and she admitted she wasn't a huge Star Trek person when she came in. She was a Star Wars person. And so the fact that she's found ways to do all these clever things, like hell, she got an Eisner nomination for a Star Trek comic, and licensed comics never get Eisner attention. So yeah, she's found all kinds of really smart, interesting ways to keep those comics feeling fresh. I mean, those comics first came out in the mid 60s. And so to do anything that feels new and fresh at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I republished one of my interviews with Dave Gibbons. And I was curious because, he joined DC in the mid 80s. I'm like, when DC had the Star Trek license, I'm like, did you ever, think that you'd be doing Star Trek comics? He's like, when they first approached me, I thought that's exactly what I'd be doing. And he broke down. I always forget the name of the Italian artist that did those Gold Key 60s.
Oh, the Gold Key, yeah.
And he's like, he goes, he didn't want to do likenesses, so when he could, he would put all the other characters in a panel in silhouette and only have to focus on one character. He goes, they also had tons of shots of the ship in space to fill a panel and stuff. And I was just crying because I'm like, I remember reading these things. And yeah, that's exactly what they were. Because Gold Key would reprint the hell out of them for decades and stuff. And so like in the 70s and 80s, I was reading those Gold Key.
The big bound up books. That's how I first read those stories too. And they were so just off model. Like the ship was off model, the characters, like the personalities,
the painted covers, which were gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
They're wearing uniforms you never saw before. And clearly the poor guy was only going by whatever photo reference they sent him while the show was on. He wasn't watching it in Italy. He was just going by the photo references. And they're bizarre, but that's what makes them fun.
I was thinking about those books recently because I just finished. So I'm doing this graphic novel with Francis Coppola that's based on Megalopolis. And Jacob Phillips, the artist, drew the entire book without having seen one frame of the movie. And so I was thinking of those Gold Key Star Treks. So I'm like, we really haven't come that far. Like, we're still having artists draw stuff based on other media, but not giving them all the reference to actually know what they're supposed to look like, which in this case was what Coppola wanted. Like, he didn't want it to feel beholden to anything. He wanted it to be its own thing, which is great. But it is funny that like we're still doing that where you just don't necessarily know what the stuff looks like. I mean, Walt Simonson tells these great stories about working on Close Encounters, where he saw the movie once and was scribbling down on napkins in the dark, like what the ships looked like. And that was all he had for reference, and couldn't draw Richard Dreyfuss's likeness. And so I thought the book came out great. But he tells the story where, he just drew on the back of these napkins, like scribbles in the dark as his only reference of like the mothership and everything. And then at some point the studio sent people to his house, or perhaps it was Men in Black, that came to take his reference away because they didn't want that getting out and like letting people. I'm like, they're napkins. It scrawls on napkins. So it's, I don't know. Licensed comics is a funny business.
Oh, honestly, man, I've had great conversations about them. And in fact, what you're telling me, I think post New York Comic Con, I'm going to have to bug Walter and talk about some of the other adaptations that he did over the years. Yeah. I had Jerry Ordway talk about Batman '89.
Oh, such a great adaptation.
Absolutely. Well, and also the Hoops of Fire. He had to jump through for all the. Well, and he said Keaton and Kim Basinger were fine with their likenesses, but like Nicholson, he apparently drew like a yellow highlight circle around one and scribbled back in his, that came back to Jerry. This isn't me. And that's he's like, he didn't autograph it or anything, but he goes, clearly that was Jack. It wasn't his agent. I mean, that was Jack writing that. And I love hearing stories like that. No, it's amazing.
I do every Comic-Con. I do this licensed comics panel where we always tell these ridiculous stories of like the challenges of doing licensed comics. There's one where we did a comic based on Saw 2.
Sure.
And the actor that plays Jigsaw, like not exactly a known commodity before the Saw movies. And so there was a panel where it was just the back of his head, like just fully the back of his bald head. And he sent it back and rejected. He goes, that's not what the back of my head looks like. And we're like, well, how do you know? But I just thought it was funny that even a guy like that, character actor, like bald head, like had vanity about the lines on the back of his head. So but at a certain point, you're like, well, that's all part of doing this stuff. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Do those movie adaptations, do they sell well?
I mean, it depends, and certainly not anywhere near the way they used to. Because, like, when we were reading Star Wars, that's all. Again, like
that's all we had.
Like these,
other than the first movie. Yeah, that's all we had, other than the first movie. No, you're right.
Right, and so then, like, I remember you read Star Wars, be like, wait, this scene with Biggs on Tatooine, like, that's not in the movie. And so then it was cool because it had these deleted scenes or what have you. Now, like, I don't know, they don't really have the same cachet just because you can watch the thing over and over immediately.
Yes.
I still think they can be done in clever ways, kind of like a literary adaptation, like it's still fun to translate something to a different format. And again, like Jacob Phillips having all the freedom in the world. And I even had freedom on the story to adapt it to the medium in a way that fit and wasn't just like straight adaptation kind of thing. So those kind of things I think are still interesting and fun. But yeah, for the most part, like, I don't know if just like an episode adaptation of Mandalorian or something is captivating other than just because it's done by, really good creators.
Well, again, that's what made a lot of the movie adaptations interesting. I didn't realize Jacob Phillips, Sean's son, did the Saw book.
No, I'm sorry. Jacob did Megalopolis.
Oh, wow. Even cooler. Wow. That's great, man. So when is that coming out?
I don't know.
All right, then.
So we've wrapped the book, and now we're figuring out like the best publishing outlet for it and everything like that. So there's a couple pieces to wrangle, but the book itself is wrapped and done. So that's good because it was quite a process. You might
have heard my phone ding a couple times while we've been talking. That was Gabe Hardman telling me about seeing a screening of Megalopolis and seeing Coppola in a Q&A because he's in LA and everything. So no, I understand, and I'm mildly intrigued, Chris. I don't know. I got to be honest. Go into the movie theater, and I don't know if because I'm becoming an old man. First of all, a movie ticket should not cost the same amount of more than what I'm paying for a month of streaming. Sorry, it just shouldn't. And that's strike one.
For the price of a movie ticket, you could buy 3 new comics.
You're not far off.
Yeah,
certainly at least one trade, depending on the company.
Right. Yeah,
and it's certainly with Image Books, especially a first volume of a story, you could probably buy 2 trades.
Yeah, or this. You can buy this book for the same price as the movie ticket. So
there you go.
Is that lasting entertainment?
Is that the?
That's the softcover reprint. Yeah.
Okay, and is that for the direct adaptation or the direct reprint, or is that for the deluxe?
This is just a cover-to-cover reprint, softcover, yeah.
Okay. So how much, do you know the retail prices?
$21.99 and $50 for the deluxe hardcover.
Well, and again, the deluxe one hardcover, and again, lots of back matter, everybody. Lots of back matter. So I highly recommend it. Let's see if there's a new comment here. Barucci wants to know how he gets a personalized copy of the hard copy.
Come see me at the con.
There you go. I'm sure Nick is going to be there.
He'll definitely be there. Yeah.
So yeah,
Friday at 4:00 at the Simon booth.
That's really cool. All right, I got to ask you before we wrap about another thing that I know, and you'll forgive me, it's another adaptation. Although it started, as I remember, because you were on the show and you had your character Onyx, and I know Onyx sprang from the ideas behind ROM. And there's a great panel from ROM and everything. But yeah, tell me about your love of ROM and Onyx and how it eventually led to Hasbro and you guys getting the license. And you finally writing ROM comics yourself?
Yeah, so we got the Transformers license in 2005, and it was in the fall of 2005 when it launched. I think it was 2006 when it launched. We got the rights in 2005, and it was like my next call to Hasbro was, okay, anyway, now that we're doing Transformers, can we do ROM? And they go, can we do what? Like there were people there at that time. This is pre-Michael Kelly, and Michael Kelly was like the longest running he's the new publisher at Boom, but he was the longest running Hasbro publishing person and was a great partner on everything. But this is pre-Michael Kelly, and the people there didn't really know that they owned ROM. And I go, well, you did, because Hasbro bought Parker Brothers, and so it's sitting somewhere in your Indiana Jones warehouse of toys. And so it became this like 10-year quest to try to get the rights to ROM, and every time it was like shut down on all sides by various factions of lawyers, because the Marvel series back in the 70s and 80s, they created the entire backstory, all the characters around ROM, all the different Space Knights, all the human characters, like all of it belonged to Marvel. And so all I originally wanted to do was do reprints. And, they said no, because we can't quite parse who owns what, who gets what, who should get what percentage. And so it became this 10-year quest of like trying to, putting together like, here's who owns what, here's how we'll break down the economics of it all, here's how much money you guys could each make at these different levels. And I did all of this due diligence. Finally, they were just like, no, it can never happen. It's never going to happen. It's not a thing. We don't care. It's not a going concern for Hasbro. Please stop. And so then I go, why don't we just make our own? And so that was what kind of led me and Lock and Key artist Gabriel Rodriguez to coming up with Onyx, which is like our sort of female armored cyborg.
Yeah.
That borrowed a bit from ROM. In fact, a reprint of the book that I issued through the Syzygy imprint that I have now, we changed the logo to be even more ROM-like, so it definitely has some echoes. Like it's sort of our cover band version of what we would have liked it to be. But the funny thing is, right around the time Onyx was launching, Hasbro in the Michael Kelly era called me and said, hey, you want to do ROM? I'm like, yes, I still want to do ROM. So in 2016, we got to launch our own version of ROM, and we had to make various concessions. Like we had to change bits of the design. Like Marvel owned the feet, the Sal Buscema design of the feet was a little bit different from the toy. And so honestly, these are the real conversations that we had in meetings, about these things. And so it's so funny. The one update I wanted to make to our ROM was the toy. There's a ROM toy back there over the shoulder.
Okay. Oh, let me zoom in.
Right.
Because we can see it. There he is. Yeah. You're pointing at it. Absolutely.
It was a terrible toy. Like they didn't have the means to do like articulated fingers or anything like that. So he had these like sort of formed molded mitten hands to hold the couple light up toys that it came with. I go, all right, well, it doesn't make sense in the comics for him to have mitten hands. I want to give him fingers so he can actually have functional fingers. And man, the fan freaked out over that. Like it was, and I go, like Iron Man went from being this clunky gray thing to like streamlined red and gold. You guys accepted that, okay? Well, presumably, yeah. I don't know what the letter writers wrote.
Yeah, I don't know what the letter writers are thinking back in '65 or whatever. Absolutely.
Things like giving him fingers versus the mittens didn't feel like an egregious change, but some fans have like never forgiven us.
Oh, 100%.
So, yeah.
All right, a couple observations from Nick Barucci. First of all, he says, I will say that Chris was brilliant in getting the transporter license. I never knew, and this is an interesting fact, keep in mind that Universal owns the rights to the bolts in Frankenstein's neck. Now I got to go back and look at guys like Bernie Wrightson and others who have done their own spins on the Frankenstein
monster. Most people are
monster.
careful about it. Every now and then somebody will do a Frankenstein with the bolts, and I'm always like, oh, shit, like Universal hopefully doesn't see that because, yeah, that's theirs.
And it's funny now that they're releasing Universal Monster comics and stuff.
And
So
they're very well done. Yeah,
they are very well done.
Frankenstein book especially is great.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And also, every time they try to, like with the Mummy movie and the Wolfman movie with Benicio del Toro, and it's like, you know, a lot of it was that 40s aesthetic and 30s aesthetic with Frankenstein and Dracula and the Mummy. That's what made those things special. And I think you get away with a modern Mummy thing. But man, it is. I'm sorry. It's Lugosi. It's the Lugosi Dracula. It's the Karloff / Glenn Strange Frankenstein design of the Universal movies, you know?
Yeah, or it's a creepy old mommy getting out of a crypt, you know, not necessarily what they did in the Tom Cruise version. It's funny because we went after the Universal for years. At first I wanted like the black and white versions. I wanted to do black and white comics with the old Universal monsters. And then when the Dark Universe was trying to come into existence, we were like, all right, let's do Dark Universe comics. And they pitched us on their plan. And it was like this 60-year plan of like, you know, like we're going to introduce these and then these and then these, and then they're going to team up. And then all the monsters who were the original villains in the old movies, they're all going to be anti-heroes now. So it's like the Dark Avengers. I go, could you guys just start with one? You know, like everybody kind of wanted to force the MCU, and like the MCU wasn't a thing until it started out with a good movie and then grew sort of a bit more organically. And so now, you know, you see these attempts where you try to like create a universe whole cloth from scratch right at the start. Like, let's just start with one good one and build on that. But
when Warner Brothers tried to reintroduce King Arthur in the Knights of the Round Table, and this is gonna be a franchise. Maybe not. Maybe you got a lousy movie. And again, dude, I can't tell you how many TV and film reviews that I do on my show when I have guys like Franco and guys like Mitch Halleck from Terrificon and my buddy Wayne. We all the four of us sit down, and it's like, what happened here? Why did this suck? Bad writing. It's always bad writing.
In all fairness to that last Arthur movie, like the war elephants were pretty cool.
All right. Hey man, there's always moments. There's always moments. Even the Van Helsing movie, there are moments in that I appreciate. But a lot of times, like, no, you guys blew it. You missed it. You missed the point.
And part of the problem, I think, too, is like I basically just want Excalibur again. And so every time there's a King Arthur movie that's not Excalibur, I go, well, it failed because it's not Excalibur. And you're like, well, maybe I already got my Arthur movie, and now this new one can be whatever it is for whoever wants it. But I'm not necessarily that person. Like, dude, Camelot 3000 or something, you know?
There you go. Exactly, man. No, when and I think I'm a little older than you, Chris. I'm going to be 60 in December. Ow. 9 weeks away from 60. But I was in high school when Excalibur came out, the John Borman movie.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it was so great. But I also grew up on those great movies from, you know, the 40s through, or the 30s really, through modern day that, you know, you'd see back when it was a 5-channel world. And you'd see old movies and stuff. So no, I mean, Robert Taylor made Knights of the Round Table in the 50s. I love the Tony Curtis Knights movie, The Black Shield of Fallsworth, where they always get it wrong, but supposedly in his Brooklyn accent said, "Yonder is the castle of my father." And it's like, yeah, maybe not. So
Python gave us Monty Python gave us.
Oh my God, loved
so,
Holy Grail. Absolutely, love Holy Grail. So yeah, too goddamn funny. Well, talk about your current publishing thing that you're doing.
Yeah, so when I left IDW, Image asked me if I wanted to do an imprint there, and so Ash Wood and I basically started an imprint called Syzygy. Ash loves strange words for titles of his books and all kinds of things, and so Syzygy is like it's funny because it's one of those terms that nobody can spell, pronounce, or define, which is probably not Top Cow. You know what it means. You know how to say it. You know how to spell it. Syzygy, much more challenging, and so but also much more Ashley Wood. And so we just tried to do these books that are sort of pleasantly off kilter, you know, that aren't necessarily like interchangeable with a book you might find anywhere else. And so it's kind of hard to define when people ask me to pitch what we're looking for, because I don't know until I see it. But I guess what I don't want is the kind of things that you wouldn't necessarily know whose logo would be on it, because it could be any number of different places. And so again, like, everybody publishes such a wide, interesting array of material now that nobody's really doing just one thing anyway. So I certainly don't mean to sound like I'm slighting anybody, but we just try to find stuff that I think is filtered through our kind of off-kilter personalities and sensibilities. And so, yeah, we've done some of our own stuff. Like we brought Zombies vs. Robots back into print, but we've also been doing other people's books, like currently doing a book with Owen King, Jesse Kellerman, and Mariana Ignazi called Self-Help. That's kind of a satire of the self-help industry, but also this LA crime noir story. That's a ton of fun. I actually have a book coming out next week called The Feeding with David Boer and Drew Zucker. That's just this one-shot horror story. I'm doing a book with Jordan Hart and a few different artists. That's a Christmas anthology horror comic this fall. So yeah, just, all kinds of things. Not trying to do too many because it's mostly a team of one as far as handling most of the heavy lift on that front goes. And so in addition to that, because just doing, the occasional new comic isn't necessarily a sustainable thing in today's world.
Sure.
Doing things like Megalopolis with Coppola, doing these Marvel archival books. There's a few others that are on tap with other publishers too that I can't quite talk about just yet, but happy to do as many of those kind of stuff like from my childhood that I love that I can. In fact, on the shelf back there's a book that just came out. No, I'm sorry, just comes out this fall. That's a collection of the old Marvel calendars that I'm doing with Abrams Comic Arts.
Fun.
A big 13 by 13 hardcover edition that collects all those very unique calendars from the 70s and 80s. And so, yeah, kind of just enjoying and thrashing about in lots of directions, as a freelancer, because for almost 20 years, I wasn't able to do any kind of freelance work. And so it's, it's the good and bad of freelance in that you could take on all kinds of things, but it's also, there's either a lot of projects all at once, or you're like, oh shit, is there going to be something next and when, so it's that kind of thing that I now commiserate much more with every freelancer that we work with, and the challenges that they face, especially in a tightening market and all of that. So you just try to find as many different ways to, stay relevant and do interesting things and do hopefully sellable things and keep trying to have fun at it.
Dean has a couple comments. Haspiel, isn't syzygy when all 9 or 10, actually I think 8 now, planets in the Milky Way align into a straight line?
Well, yes, it is, but I figured everybody already knew that, Dean. No, but yeah, that's the thing I love is like when Ash first brought up syzygy, he goes, well, when I first blocked about it, he goes, well, it's got cosmic relevance, all that, planets in line and everything. Like me and you were in line. I'm like, yeah, but it was also the cool mystic in Jim Starlin's Dreadstar. And so that's like, we all come at it from different points. But yes, Dean, yes, absolutely. To Dean's question there, Dreadstar was the first time I saw syzygy. And so, yeah, like we all sort of bring our own bits of syzygy to this imprint. So, yeah.
I love it, man. No, again,
yeah, Dean is on it. Yeah.
No. Again, we were all reading the same shit back in the 80s. I respect that. Absolutely, man. Too goddamn funny. That's great. Truly, Dean, great talking to you, and congratulations on what I hope is the first of many reprints of the Fireside books. But, yeah, here's the Alex Ross cover, everybody. Origins of Marvel Comics by Stan Lee. Get the bigger edition. It's worth it. All the back matter, everything that Chris wrote and assembled from the other writers and the artists. You'll absolutely love this, and especially first of all, you'll love the original. I don't care what this idiot critic said. It is a great book, and yes, it stands folklore. But when the legend becomes famous, you print the legend. You don't print the history, as we learned in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And that's what you're getting. That stands the Liberty Valance of the origins of Marvel Comics.
I will say the one other contributor in the book I didn't talk enough about is Tom Brevoort, who's probably, the most encyclopedic knowledge of Marvel, currently at Marvel. And so
yes.
Tom did this great essay too, that again talks about, the collaborative process between these guys and the Marvel method and how the writers and artists worked when they weren't necessarily working from full script, and how the artists bore, the heavier lift on a lot of these things. And so Tom's piece and then Alex Ross's piece, which is not really a commentary on Tom's, but it kind of builds on what Tom did, and their work is this great 1-2 punch to really, again, sort of set the context and just give proper credit to all these guys, and again, like we weren't trying to be apologists for Stan or for anybody in this book, but we were just trying to really make sure that everybody got their proper due. And I think all the different pieces in this book really add up to that. Really, certainly praising, like, we all adore Jack, we all adore Steve, we all adore all the guys that helped and the women that, built the Marvel Universe into what it is now. And so this is kind of the start of all of that. And so, yeah, like I say, we did what we could to really make sure that everybody got their proper due. And we, all credit to all sides on all of these things was sort of our mandate on putting this book together.
That's great, man. And Chris is going to be at New York Comic Con signing the book at the Simon & Schuster booth on Friday. So look for that. Yeah. 4 p.m. There you go. 4 p.m. Eastern, everybody. And thank you, Nick and Dean, for watching and contributing, and everyone else who's contributed.
Steve and everybody else. Yeah,
and
thank you.
Steve Conley, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know if Steve's going to be in New York, but I know Dino and Nick will be there. I'm sorry I won't be there. It would be great to see all three of you guys at the very least. But yeah, I'm not, unfortunately. And I keep getting emails from creators and fans too going, "Hey, going to be in New York?" And it's like, yeah, no, sorry, I'm not. And I'm sorry I'm not. But again, I know everyone's going to have a great time, and that's excellent. And I'm glad everyone will have fun next week. But no, thanks for joining me, Chris. This was great.
Always a pleasure talking to you, man. It's such a thrill doing this. I love it.
Oh, you're very kind. And truly, anytime you want to promote something new, and especially when the Megalopolis thing is ready, I think that's a very interesting project.
Well, maybe we can talk about the calendar book and then use that as a segue to get into Pizzazz and Foom and all the other great Marvel. Dynamite and all of that. Yeah,
absolutely, man. No, I love, and the old DC calendars were great that way too. And when
there are 3 of those. They wouldn't be quite as thick a book, but there's a nice book in there somewhere if I can talk the right parties into doing that too.
I loved, where all of a sudden there's an obscure day in April and it's like, that's Matter Eaterlad's birthday. And it's like, of course it is. Sure it is. Absolutely. Well, that's why I got mad at DC when they made Superman's birthday the month that Action Comics debuted. And it's like, no, man, February 29th, the leap year day. Because that's one of the reasons why he stayed young all this time. And I mean, just stupid shit like that was in the original calendars. I loved that shit. I absolutely loved it. Well, that's cool. Oh, I should ask you as a sneak, are you able to use, because weren't Conan images part of the Marvel calendars? And are you any issues with using that now that Titans has the Conan license and everything?
No, we went and got proper rights on that. And then actually celebrity guest star Nick Barucci was kind enough to help facilitate the Red Sonja appearance in the 77 calendar. And
wonderful.
So, it's all done above board and done properly. And the great thing too is that Abrams also did a replica of the 75 calendar, where the dates line up to 2025. And so
great.
If you want to be like me, like whenever the years would line up right, I would have the calendar
on
my walls. But you can now do that with the 75 calendars now being reissued because it lines up with 2025. So
wow,
yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
That's outstanding. Excellent. All right, definitely our next conversation.
Awesome.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. We had a great week. It might be a little tricky next week with New York Comic Con, but I'm going to do my best. In the meantime, I'm going to put up more shorts in the YouTube section, and they're expanding the time on the shorts because it's tough to get them down to a good, under 60-second cut. Well, apparently after October 15th, they're going to allow longer shorts.
That's good for people like me that just ramble on about nonsense. Yeah, we need more space to ramble.
Absolutely true.
Well, John, thank you very much.
No, thank you, Chris. Until next time, everybody, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.